G'day, I'm Nick Clements from YourQS and welcome to our podcast, Beyond the Guesstimate. I joined the construction sector in 1993 and pretty much the whole time I've been frustrated about how the industry works. The ethos behind our business is something I'm calling cost-informing design. So that's about trying to improve how we design and the decisions we make around design and then the business in behind it. I take a pretty broad view of cost, so I'm not just talking about product cost or installed cost, but the costs in running the businesses that provide the products that get installed in building sites. For me, I'm relatively late to the building industry, and I'm certainly relatively late to being a QS. This is probably my fifth career, I guess. So I've done a variety of things. I started off in engineering, got into sales engineering. From that, got into marketing. From marketing, I got into business management, did an MBA. So I started developing because I realized when I was in the sales and the engineering, I actually enjoyed the business side of things. So got into marketing. Then from marketing, got into the construction sector, got into software, got into quantity surveying software. From that, got into quantity surveying. So I've got a variety of things that I've done in my background. But what I really enjoy about quantity surveying is that all of those different aspects of business get brought together into what I do now. So it's not like any of those experiences I've gained through my career are wasted. They actually help me in what I do now. And I think one of the big issues in technical jobs, technical roles, technical businesses is our training and qualifications all focus around the technical things that we do in our jobs and not so much about all the other things that you need to know to be effective in whatever role you're in. And particularly in business, the understanding of business and business skills, the business knowledge, accounting, finance, all those sorts of things. A lot of us in the building industry do end up in our own businesses, and we don't, unless you're like me where you've done a whole bunch of different things, you don't necessarily get those sort of business related experiences to feed into what you're doing. And so while I'm interested in sort of the quantity surveying and the building and the process around building, I'm actually just as interested in business and just as passionate about different things in business. So with this podcast, you'll have noticed if you've watched a few episodes, is it's a real mixture of business things, business skills, product, construction specific stuff. And that's because that reflects me. That's the sort of things I'm interested in. And so today's going to be a bit about that. So one of the things in the building industry, as I'm sure everybody that's in it realises, is it's a real boom-bust industry. So we go from massive highs to massive lows. People that have joined the industry in recent times, maybe the last 10 years, will have not experienced a low, that it's been a pretty good run, but we've certainly over the last couple of years been through a pretty solid low. And the big challenge for businesses is not necessarily the high or the low, it's the change between the high and the low. So we see a lot of businesses go under on the way up as well as the way down. And the building industry is, because of that big swing, is overrepresented in business failures. And I think there's a bunch of reasons behind that. So this business knowledge is part of it, being undercapitalized, not necessarily having the skill sets is part of it. And I think a big factor is also understanding risk and understanding how you manage and deal with risks in your business. And my background's mostly the residential construction sector, and I don't think the residential construction sector really appreciate risk that well. So what I've done today is invited somebody that I've got to know over the last few years since I've been involved in the Institute of Quantity Surveyors. So Natalie Beeson used to be the chair of Auckland branch of NZIQS. I've done a reverse takeover, and so we've swapped roles. So she's now the vice chair, and I'm the chair. But it's been really good. And part of the reason why I joined the institute is because I knew I had a non-traditional QSing background. I wanted to get exposed to people that were real QSers that really knew that had been trained properly and had a wider range of experience. And it's been really good getting to know people like Natalie and understanding a bit more about the other disciplines and the other sort of roles QSs get involved in across the industry and picking their brains. So that's basically what we're looking to do today. Is Natalie's got a very different background to mine, comes from a different part of the world, works in a completely different part of the construction sector. So I thought it'd be good to just sort of unpick some of what she's learned over her career and maybe just look at how it could apply into the sector that I'm primarily involved in, which is the residential construction. So welcome, Natalie.
Thank you, Nick.
So I guess a bit of background. So where are you from originally?
So you might get from the accent, I'm from North London. I came to New Zealand 20 years ago.
So what brought you to New Zealand?
I wanted to move out of London. I'd had most of my working life in London and just needed a break. It was going to be Canada or New Zealand, and New Zealand won. We came on holiday and fell in love with it. So I went around trying to find a job. Ryder Levitt Bucknell gave me that opportunity. So 12 years later, I was still at Riders. So yes,
I'd normally say the weather would make things better, but it's really wild.
Yeah,
today,
absolutely wild tonight. Yeah. So it wasn't the weather that brought me over, but it was probably a change in lifestyle. I wanted to be able to commute 5 minutes to work, and not the hour and a half that used to take me in London. I've finally done it. I can now cycle to work, right. Which I love. So
what got you into quantity surveying?
Oh, gosh. When I was leaving school at the age of 17, I didn't really know what to do. I was actually about to join the army, funny enough. Okay. And my boyfriend at the time was a trainee QS for a contractor in London. And he said, you know what, you'd be a great PQS. And so I said I didn't actually know what that was. So I had to go away and do some research. A
PQS
a PQS is a quantity surveyor that works for the client. So almost a project QS.
Is it professional or project?
Well, some people call it professional and some people call it project. I don't really like that title, professional. So I usually go project because that's what we...
But effectively you're working for the
client. Directly for the client, yeah. So I did a part-time degree, day release. It was meant to be over 5 years. And I was working for one of the biggest PQS practices in the world, which is Garden and Theobald.
Okay.
So I had a really good start in the start. But unfortunately, we had the crash, the market crash, and I started doing the filing. So I was like, I don't like this anymore.
So 2008?
That was, no, but the one before that, I'm old. It was 1990, 1991.
Oh,
yeah, 1991. So I'm just showing my age now.
It's a bit of a worry when you're specific about which crash.
Yeah, which crash. The first one. So I ended up finishing my degree at Leeds, what used to be Leeds Polytechnic, and I couldn't find a job after that. But when I eventually did, I was working for London Borough of Redbridge. Then I was working for Capita Dove, and they were seconding me.
So what do they do?
Oh, they're another PQS. Okay. So we have big projects like the BBC Broadcasting House refurb. That was one I was involved in. But I eventually got seconded onto the Jubilee Line extension project, which is one of these huge mega £1 million jobs that was meant to be open by 2000. It was funny because I was actually studying it in 1992 and then I was actually reporting to the government on the progress of the completion in 2000. Well, no, it was 1999. So, yeah.
So who was it you were working for? So you're still client side?
So I was seconded to what was then, it was a Jubilee Line, Northern and Piccadilly lines.
So it's a separate...
So it's the London Underground,
right.
basically,
okay.
London Underground, yeah. So, and from then I got taken on as a permanent role within their major projects and went through the process of being taken over by a private supplier. So Bechtel and Amy took over the running of the railway, which was really interesting because we went from a public-run company to a private one, which was a big eye-opener for us.
When you say public run, like council-owned? Or
yeah, well, London Underground's like a government entity, a bit like, KiwiRail is here. That was interesting times.
And they sort of subcontracted out the operation and development to private enterprise?
So the private bit comes in that they got paid for running the railways. It was very complicated. They had that could be another podcast, to be honest. It's that complicated.
Yeah, I'm not that rail interested.
No.
I'm not what a train spotter. I'm not one of those. So in terms of your role then as a PQS, what sorts of things were you doing for them?
Mainly project QS. So I would be pre-tender and post-tender and estimating. So really taking projects from the start through to the completion, a bit of everything. And that's my favourite role.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you're estimating stuff like railway lines, like how different is that to, my experience, obviously houses.
Yes.
How different is it to estimating a house or other construction?
It is hard. Well, it's not hard. I can't say that. It's if you've got the skills to estimate, you can do virtually anything. I learnt from a few good mentors. And what's the big difference is, I mean, probably the standard methods are very different.
So how you actually do the measures?
Yeah.
Is it more standardised in that sort of space?
No. We've the building here is much more standardised through standard method of measurements for buildings. We are looking into trying to improve the ones for infrastructure, but it's work in progress.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So you'd be estimating. So we talk through the sort of process steps that you'd be involved in typically?
Typically.
So maybe start at the beginning as to what a tender would look like and how you'd be involved in that?
Yeah, so we'd be approached by a client, say for a prison. I did a few prison jobs. Sounds weird. We do have a team of us building up estimates and take the client through all the cost control and the cost planning.
So that's helping the client understand what the expected cost is?
Yeah, so a lot of the time the scope would change as well. So obviously they're going to have a limited budget that sometimes you have to build within. So we were helping that as well. So whether you had to take a floor off of a building or something like that. So when you get the go-ahead from the client to say, yes, we're going to go and tender, we would prepare schedules of quantities. So I'm involved in that. So that's another thing I can do. And then we'd be involved in the tender evaluation. So we would assist the team with the cost analysis, basically, to see what's...
So you'd have a bunch of tenderers submitting their prices.
Yeah.
And you'd be working through
understanding... working through the tags and making sure that we got what we needed. And that led through to the cost management. So cost management, you take your contract sum, but you would know you've got areas of risk and areas that were tagged out that you need to allow for. So you don't undervalue what the final cost is going to be.
Right. So I guess that's leading nicely into sort of the area I want to talk about. So there is a history of these big projects costing moonbeams more. So I'm sort of interested in unpicking with people... Yeah, typically they have a lot more people involved in the sort of estimating and cost management than what we'd see on other projects, but you wouldn't say necessarily the track record's that much better. So why does it go wrong? Where are the issues?
Yeah, that's a nugget, isn't it?
Yeah.
So my belief is that people in the industry have a misconception of what contingency is within a project. And quite often I've seen financial people and people putting business cases together just take it out, not understanding that it's actually required to deliver the work. So it's quite dangerous because if it's not understood, it's just we don't need that. That's just your bunts you put in to be able to deliver something. But in fact, the QS knows that you're going to have contract growth, you're going to have risks that occur, you're going to have risks you don't even know occur. So it's required, and it's known across the industry. It's the way it's the client understands it.
So they think it's a bit of fat that can be
and having worked for Auckland Airport and KiwiRail, we've seen it. We're getting better at it now, and embracing it, and have procedures to get reasonable levels of contingency within our projects now. Yeah,
I've often have this discussion with customers, builders, say, preparing a price for their client, wanting to take the contingency out. And I sort of say it that, stuff's going to go wrong. Everybody knows stuff's going to go wrong, and you're going to end up wearing some of it. So some of it you can pass on to the client. Some of it you're going to end up wearing. If you don't make a provision for the fact that stuff's going to go wrong, it's going to cost you money, then it comes out of your margin. That's the only place it's going to come from. And I always, I argue with that there should be two contingencies. One for the builder, which covers the stuff they're going to wear, and then the client should be applying the same thinking, that there's going to be things that go wrong that the builder can rightfully pass on to the client. So, and it may be scope creep, or it may be, they dig into the ground and they find it's a rubbish dump underneath it or something, something unknown. So the client's going to end up wearing those, but the builder, I'd describe, so say they fall out with the electrician and they've got to go get another one, and the other one charges them more than the previous one. Well, you can't go to the client and say, hey, sorry, I don't like Joe anymore, I'm going to use Jim. It's 50% more. The client's going to say, well, not my problem.
You've got it.
Those things happen. Maybe Jim gets or Joe gets hit by a truck.
Absolutely. And there's different ways of getting to that contingency level as well. We're quite sophisticated how we get to ours. We actually use risk registers and QRAs, quantitative risk analysis.
Okay. So what to
get a figure.
So what would a risk register? I'll unpick that a bit. I like structure around
these sorts of things. So you'd have a project risk register, and we actually use ARM, Active Risk Manager. And so you can upload it, and you have to do this with all the stakeholders involved to get all your high-level risks. So I would say between 5 and 10 risks will cover your commercial risk on a project.
And what's a typical example of what a commercial risk might be? The
key ones usually are ground conditions. The other ones would be services, unforeseen fit services.
So you're digging in the ground.
And you find something, we have interfaces with either the public or other projects. That's a big one as well. What else? Changes in government, things like that. But there's a whole realm of standard risks that you can have.
So you build up a list of these things that you think might happen and might be applicable to your project.
Yes.
Then what do you do with it?
So we call them discrete risks. So we've identified those risks, and you can actually use a QS to value them, and that goes into part of the QRA.
So say in that pipe example, if I come across a pipe underground, what's the cost?
It's like that's crystal balling. So so you have to look at what the estimate's got, what allowance have you got in the estimate. So most good estimators will allow for that. So you could say, it's plus and minus 50% at an early stage, or 10% at a later stage. So there's a bit of science behind what figures you put in. The other type of risk, inherent risk, is the estimate uncertainty. So this is the people that are doing the estimating, so the rates and the quantities. There's a risk around that, and you can model it, and we use ARM to model that risk.
Okay.
So that's really quite clever. I've not used that in New Zealand. So
so that's basically acknowledging that it is an estimate, and estimates won't be right. You're trying to predict the future.
Absolutely.
So there's a bit of degree, no matter how definitive it looks.
Yes. There's always, and the people that know that are the QSs. They are very into all the detail, that like it could be a model or drawings. They will know what's not there, so they know they've measured the earthworks, but actually the volume might be a bit plus or minus error on it. So that's all fed into our Active Risk Manager and spits out a QRA. But that
QRA.
Quantitative risk analysis. So that's where all the P50s and P95s that you might see.
So the QRA is a set of numbers?
It is. It's a Monte Carlo analysis. And I don't want to get into it because it's way over my head.
So is it a dollar value? So you've got this list of identified risks. You put a cost, estimated cost
and
against
a probability
them,
as well.
And you sort of multiply it all out and it gives you a number.
It runs a yes/no sort of. Will it happen? So something that's a medium risk is almost a yes/no answer. Something that's under 50% is probably a no answer. But the big ones are the ones you want to capture, the high risk ones.
Yeah, right.
So it'll grab them, the values of those. So there's you can get two results. You can get one figure out. But you have to decide whether you want the probability of being 50% or probability of it being 95%. Now, this is, at the end of the day, the figure that you're going to deliver that program at.
Right.
So you talk about having a P50 estimate and a P95 estimate. So
I pinched your chart from the presentation you did. So if you could bring that up, Pete, so this is a chart sort of talking about that. So this chart is looking across is how developed the design is, and obviously the more conceptual the design is, the greater chance there is of things going to change through to a fully detailed design. So maybe do you want to talk through this?
Yeah. So,
and this will be part of what you're applying to develop that risk analysis.
It is indeed. So one of the tricks is to make sure that you know what level of definition your design is at. That's quite a skill.
At the inception stage, it was between 0 and 40% was the sort of range for the contingency you might have in place. At a concept stage, it was sort of 0 to 30%. When you're getting to the C2 to preliminary design, talking about 0 to 20%, then 0 to 10% for a developed design, and then between 0 and 5% was the resulting contingency for the detailed design.
Yeah. So this has come from it was originally called the American Advanced, get this right, American Association of Cost Engineers. That's right. Thank you. Yep. And it's what it's trying to do is tell you what range of percentage you need for each stage.
Right.
So, and it's split between project contingency, which is equivalent to your P50 estimate, and the P95, which is your P95.
So without getting into the whole Monte Carlo thing, the P50 idea is that there's a 50% chance it's going to come in under that, 50% chance it comes over, and P95 is 95% chance it's going to come in under the budget, or on the budget or under, and 5% it's over, but not necessarily how much it's going to be over.
No, so the P95s are the one that you would go for funding, but you would say to your PM, or you'll deliver it within P50. So you'll have control over that management reserve, often called management reserve.
So that's effectively the contingency?
Yeah, it's actually the between the P50 and P95 contingency. If that.
So the idea is that depending on where it's at in the design, you've got to stick a lump of money on top of it to give you that degree of confidence that you
will have it. And with us, you don't want to go with any business. You don't want to go back to the funders and say, "I need more money." So it's best to use that P50, P95 in the first instance,
right? So
even though it might look like you'd never hit it.
And so there'd be potentially a big chunk of contingency in there to get the P95.
Well, you can see with the figures that, potentially it's like 50%. So, and that scares people. But if you're at a feasibility stage of a project, that's what you'll expect. You'll have no design and your scope's probably still being developed as well.
So I realise you're not here in your KiwiRail capacity, and so we're not going to talk about any KiwiRail specific projects. But what I'm suspecting is you're putting up the budget to a politician and there's a 50% contingency in there. Yeah. The first thing you're going to do is say, oh, let's get rid of that fat and we'll talk about this other number instead.
That used to happen. They're learning. So people like myself and my colleagues, it's a bit of education for them, but they're learning that they can't just take it out. They might want to reduce it and go for a P80.
Right. So that means there's a higher chance it's going to go over budget, but they're willing to wear
absolutely.
That
so
risk.
It's up to each individual client to decide what percentage they go for.
Right. So there's a bit of a negotiation and
it's your business model, isn't it? Yeah. So do you want to go to a client and say, I might be able to deliver this, or do you want to say, I will deliver this?
Yeah. And so is this sort of approach widely used across the sort of commercial infrastructure sector?
It is getting used more and more. I know, speaking with colleagues, that they're adopting the same across, especially infrastructure clients.
So the sort of history we've seen of projects blowing out massively as a result of not using this methodology?
More than likely.
Right.
Could be other
so
things.
Hopefully we'll see. Yeah, it would probably be worth a bit of a discussion about, in your experience, have you had projects where they've blown out massively, and what sort of things have caused the blowouts? Other than, I guess, underpricing it to start with.
I mean, the only thing that's going to cause a blowout is not having the right contingency. I mean, if your scope changes, you get more budget. So
So this really comes back to...
it comes back to what contingency you've got in there. And we've been able to run the figures again and again to prove that if you listen to us with the contingency, that this wouldn't have happened. Yeah. So
it's obviously a vital part of the process. And I guess from my perspective, in the residential construction, it's nowhere near as sophisticated as that. But it's potentially, we could say, could we come up with a simplified model that maybe we look at it?
Yeah, absolutely. Using the ranges that are on that sheet, that's easy enough. I mean, they were developed for buildings, and we use them as a guide for infrastructure. So they are guide, and there does need to be testing of it. So I try and collect the data, try and always test what we're putting in.
Right.
But that takes a long time.
So if you've got a project budget set with a contingency in there, sort of who owns that contingency? Is it
It's up to the business.
Right.
So in our case, it'll be held at what level? Program level, and not at project level. So, but you could have it that it's held at, portfolio level, board level for these mega multi-million-dollar projects.
And so if you've set up your budget, you've got contingencies in there, you're going out to tenderers to tender, would you expect them to have contingencies in the numbers that they've put together? Because, say it is a fixed price contract, so I guess that simplifies it. So say it's a fixed price contract, would you expect them to have some contingencies?
I'm not an expert in that area, but I would expect they'd have something in their rates, Yeah,
so I guess that's my point about the two, is that what we've been talking about here is mostly the client side one. But if the builders or the main contractor is signing on the dotted line for a price, they're effectively taking some risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And that will be built into all their rates.
Which I don't like, because I like to see it, so I understand.
But if they put all their contingent in the rates, they won't win the project. So it's a bit of a balance.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. You'll have to get somebody in that can talk to that.
I haven't come across. I've had my theories about it.
Yeah,
I haven't come across too many. So
they won't tell you.
Yeah. So when it starts going wrong, how are these contingencies accessed? How are those sort of situations dealt with?
So if we have a process in place, and most places have a change process or a contingency drawdown. So if one specific event occurs, say your piles go from 25 metres to 40 metres, that's ground conditions. So you can say, okay, well, we've identified what that risk is, and now we have to draw down the contingency. And you have to decide whether you're drawing down on your management reserve or on your project contingency.
Yeah, right.
So that's a decision for the project managers usually, or the commercial managers.
Right. So how, from say a main contractor's point of view, how when it comes to the documents, how is the risk allocated? So how do you work out who's actually responsible for what risks? Have you had much exposure to that?
I haven't had that much exposure, being on the client side, but I did do an exercise once that went through 3910 and literally did a table of every clause and actually wrote who was responsible. And there was only a few that was a bit questionable.
Right.
Whether it's fair or unfair. So it's a really good exercise to do. I mean, I'd suggest anybody to try it. It's actually quite a good exercise, because people talk about risk allocation in the contract, but get into the nitty gritty and see what effect the special conditions have on it as well.
And so the sort of thing you'll be looking at then is that, does this clause cause a risk for me unfair, as the builder or me as the owner? And deciding
and be open with the contractor. So they have the client and be open about what you're talking about. Don't try and hide it.
Yeah.
If you think the client's taking the risk, and then the client thinks you're taking the risk as a contractor, there's going to be a problem somewhere along the way, or it's a misinterpretation of the contract or something. So it's best to get that out at the negotiation stage.
So I guess a couple staying away from KiwiRail ones that are in the media quite a bit is the convention centre with Fletcher's, and then also how much exposure you had to it was the Justice building in Christchurch. And a lot of the talk in the media was around where the risk sat. So particularly the Justice one, I understand the design was pretty incomplete and then ended moving from the owner to the main contractor or something.
Yeah, I don't know about that. So
those are sort of, and they're saying that one of the things that our industry isn't doing a good job of is understanding those risks, and then as a bidder against it, what risk you're taking on. So.
Yeah, well, in that case, it should have been the client's QS that sort of informs the client of where those risks are, because they've gone through and done a schedule of quantities and they know those drawings and they know the model. So they're best placed to say, you need to have this amount or level of contingency allowed for in your funding.
Right. And then,
so whether that happened or not, I
really
don't
comes
know.
Down to the nitty-gritty of those contracts.
What process did they take? Yeah.
And I guess the convention is not a fair one because obviously the fire.
That's a bit too messy.
And it's still going through. Well, I think it's just started in court as to who's actually what. So there's probably we're not going to learn
a few more years and a few more lawyer dollars.
Yeah. So I guess the lesson there for sort of thinking about my market, so the residential builders, is making sure you understand what you're signing, understanding the agreements you're working with. So 3910 is the standard. What I can't remember the name of it.
Standard contract.
Yeah, standard contract for and used in the commercial market. So we very rarely come across it in projects.
Yeah.
So the equivalent we would see most commonly would be the certified builder's contract or the master builder's contract, which is sort of equivalents of those.
So I'd suggest doing the same sort of exercise and just tableize it and say risk allocation. Sometimes you have to share the risk as well. So it would be a good exercise to do.
Yeah. And then if you're wearing risks, is make sure that you've got an estimate against them, but then also understanding what the risk is of that actually risk happening,
monetary and time wise as well, and be open, So
and then basically making sure you haven't covered that within the contingency, because it's a risk that you're taking.
So or even tag it out. You can always tag them out of the price as well.
Yep, and then it becomes part of the contract negotiation.
It's best to bring these things forwards. It's not worth sitting on them thinking, that's a way I'm going to make money. So,
Yeah, there was another thought I had was, how often have you seen in your experience that main contractors bidding to the absolute minimum and looking to recover it through the variations. So it effectively becomes a risk on the client, and you've got all these arguments around.
Yeah.
So if they underprice it at the start, then chances are it's going to be ugly all the way through. Either they're going to fall over or they're going to be fighting you the whole way. So does that sort of fit in this sort of risk management?
It can do, but it's a difficult one because if I'm looking at a tender and I can see they're really close, and one that is just that much lower and they win it because of the lowest price, because it's government procurement, we have to go by non-price as well. Right. So I would be looking at that price really carefully to see where the differences are. A lot of the time it is in P&G, and you can see whether a contractor's bought a contract, but they do. And then advising the client, that's what's happened, and then the decisions with the client.
Yeah, so I guess with the P&G, it may be the contractor's making a decision to effectively wear some of those costs themselves rather than pass it into the project. So I guess that's a business call. But
the caveat with that is that if that happens, then I would expect lots of variations to come through.
Yeah, because they're going to try and make it up some way.
Yeah.
So I guess the key is sort of having professionals involved in the process, so you've got an idea of what's going on, and being able to pick up these sorts of things. Well, it's been an interesting conversation. I've certainly learned a lot. You got any burning questions or anything, any issues you want to raise after what we've talked through?
No, it's been an experience. I'm not going to say whether it's nice or not.
You can tell me afterwards. Well, thanks, Natalie. Thanks for giving us your time and your experience. So thanks, everybody. Hopefully you've learned something from that. It certainly gave me a few things to think about. So if you want a QS that is interested in these sorts of things and looks to try and understand how to deliver your projects on budget, then talk to Nick at YourQS. If you need a railway line, then talk to Natalie at KiwiRail. Thank you.